Hello, everyone. Now, you may have noticed that the United States isn't exactly the most universally beloved country on the planet. Some might even say we're a bit like that friend who shows up to a party, drinks all the beer, breaks a lamp, and then loudly complains that nobody appreciates their dance moves. Today, we're diving into a hot topic, the countries that aren't too fond of the USA as we head into 2024. And let's be honest, we're not talking about a mild dislike here. More like the kind of deep-seated resentment that makes you want to write strongly worded letters to your local newspaper while wearing a truly unflattering hat. North Korea, a country so committed to its dislike of the US that it's practically a national pastime like baseball, but with more pronouncements about fiery annihilation. We're not talking about your standard, I don't like your taste in music kind of dislike. This is more of a you bombed my grandparents' village and imposed crippling sanctions for decades kind of dislike. It's a resentment steeped in history, dating back to the Korean War and fueled by ongoing tensions over nuclear weapons and US military presence in the region. And frankly, who can blame them? Imagine having to live under constant threat of military action, all while being told your country is part of an axis of evil. Honestly, it's enough to make anyone a bit grumpy, even without the food shortages. But hey, at least they have some truly epic parades to vent their frustrations. Of course, it's not like the US has been a perfect angel in this whole saga. Our foreign policy hasn't exactly been a beacon of peace and understanding. Remember the whole we might have accidentally bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade incident? Yeah, that didn't help. But let's be honest, blaming everything on past grievances is like refusing to leave a party because someone ate the last mini pizza. It's not productive, and honestly, there's probably better pizza out there. Next up, we have Iran, a country that's had a more turbulent relationship with the US than a teenager with their first smartphone. We're talking about decades of mistrust, sanctions, and enough geopolitical drama to make even the most hardened diplomat reach for the stress ball. Now, some might argue that Iran's dislike for the US stems from cultural differences or religious tensions, but let's be real. When you've been hit with economic sanctions that make it harder to import basic necessities, you're not exactly going to be sending Valentine's Day cards to the White House. It's like that time your roommate ate all your leftover takeout and then complained you never do the dishes. Sure, there might be underlying issues, but the immediate problem is the empty container staring you in the face. And let's not forget the whole US-backed coup that overthrew their democratically elected leader in 1953 thing. It's a bit like borrowing your neighbor's lawnmower, running it over with your car, and then offering to replace it with a rusty old pair of gardening shears. Sure, it's technically a replacement, but it's not exactly going to smooth things over. So, yeah, maybe those Death to America chants aren't just about cultural differences after all. Venezuela. A country blessed with vast oil reserves and cursed with a history of US meddling that would make even Henry Kissinger blush. You see, our relationship with Venezuela is a bit like that friend who keeps borrowing money but never seems to remember to pay it back. Except in this case, the money is political sovereignty, and the borrowing involves CIA-backed coups and economic sanctions that make it harder to buy basic necessities like, food and medicine. Now, the US government might say we're just trying to promote democracy and protect human rights. But when you've got a track record of supporting authoritarian regimes in the region, it kind of makes you sound like that friend who lectures everyone about recycling while simultaneously dumping their trash in the neighbor's yard. It's a bit hypocritical, wouldn't you say? And let's not forget the whole Hugo Chavez situation. Love him or hate him, the man was democratically elected. And the US government's attempts to undermine his rule didn't exactly win us any popularity contests in Venezuela. It's like trying to break up your friend's relationship because you don't like their new partner. Even if you think you're doing the right thing, it's probably going to backfire spectacularly. Next up is Russia, a country that's gone from Cold War adversary to geopolitical frenemy faster than you can say election meddling. Now, some might argue that Russia's dislike for the US is just a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But let's be real, when you've got a leader who literally wrote a book about how much he hates the West, it's probably not just a passing phase. It's like that ex who keeps showing up at your house unannounced, ranting about how much better their life is now. Sure, they might be trying to convince themselves as much as you, but it's still pretty clear there's some unresolved baggage there. And then there's the whole NATO expansion issue. Imagine if your neighbor kept building fences closer and closer to your property line, while loudly proclaiming it's all for security reasons. You'd probably be a bit miffed, wouldn't you? Especially if they also had a history of, say, accidentally bombing your cousin's wedding. Of course, Russia isn't exactly innocent in all this. Their human rights record is about as appealing as a week-old borscht, and their foreign policy often involves a healthy dose of might makes right. But hey, at least they're consistent in their dislike for the US. Unlike some other countries who shall remain nameless, they don't try to hide their disdain behind a veil of strategic partnerships and shared interests. They're like that grumpy old cat who hisses at everyone, but at least you always know where you stand with them. Finally, we arrive at China, a country that's simultaneously our biggest trading partner and our biggest geopolitical rival. It's a relationship that's more complicated than a Rubik's Cube, designed by a committee of diplomats, economists, and military strategists. Now, some might argue that China's dislike for the US is simply a matter of national pride. After all, they've got a long and storied history, and they're not exactly thrilled about being lectured on human rights by a country that once had slavery and still struggles with racial equality. It's like that friend who constantly criticizes your fashion choices, even though they're still rocking a pair of Crocs in public. And then there's the whole Taiwan issue. Imagine if your roommate kept flirting with your ex while insisting they're just friends. You'd probably be a bit suspicious, wouldn't you? Especially if they also had a habit of borrowing your stuff without asking, and then claiming it was always theirs to begin with. Of course, it's not like the US has been a perfect angel in this relationship either. Our trade policies often prioritize corporate interests over human rights, and our military presence in the region doesn't exactly scream peaceful coexistence. But hey, at least we're trying to be more environmentally conscious these days, even if it's mostly because we're worried about China cornering the market on solar panels. So these are the countries where the sentiment towards the USA is quite chilly as we approach 2024. From historical grievances to current political tensions, the reasons for this dislike are complex and multifaceted. It's not exactly a surprise that the US isn't winning any popularity contests in these parts of the world. But hey, at least we're still number one in military spending, right? What are your thoughts on these relationships? Is the US unfairly disliked, or are we reaping what we've sown? Are we the baddies? Drop your comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more insightful content.